First off, as songwriters, we got to have unique titles. I would never think of a 21 hit songwriter going flopping my way to the top. So that got my attention like right off the bat. Welcome, SongTown. I'm Clay Mills here with a very special guest today. I'm going to tell you who he is in 1 second. But before I do, just want to run down this incredible list of artists that he's written and produced for, the likes of Panic at the Disco, One Direction, Katy Perry, Ringo Starr, Carole King, Def Leppard, Blink-182. I could go on and on in the words of Stephen Bishop, but I'm not going to because I want to talk to this guy. Let's bring on Sam Hollander.
Hey, Clay, I want to say it's very early for a Stephen Bishop reference, but I'm always here for it. You give me any Bish, the day is headed in the right direction. So thank you, man. Thanks.
I figured that would
It
get the
worked.
day started off differently.
It worked. I love me some Bish, so that's great. One of my favorites.
Excellent. Well, Sam, we have a unique community because we're basically just a worldwide community of aspiring songwriters. And I'm sure they would love to hear your story, how you got started. I want to talk about your book. I've got it here, 21 Hit Wonder, flopping my way to the top of the charts.
This is the holy grail. This is the holy grail of songwriting failure. This is where it begins. So,
well, I mean, first off, as songwriters, we got to have unique titles. I would never think of a 21 hit songwriter going flopping my way to the top. So that got my attention like right off the bat.
well, I'll tell you, how this book was born. My parents were both really artistic and really interesting. My dad was a modern dancer who became a architect and then professor of architecture, and he was this brilliant, brilliant, heavy cat. My mom was just badass, man. She's an interior decorator in New York in the 1970s, and she climbed her way through it from the bottom and just clawed and clawed and clawed. Eventually, did apartments for Mick Jagger and Yves Saint Laurent, all these Studio 54 sort of luminaries. And when I was a little kid, it's funny. I had a very strange experience. Andy Warhol actually used to babysit me as a little kid, which is very strange and true. So my mom's partner in her firm was Jed Johnson, who was Andy Warhol's life partner. So for a moment in time, they sort of would saddle me with Andy, as because they had to, scour the city and they needed to keep me away from record shops because the only thing that I dug were records. I spent every day of my life in record shops as a little guy, flea markets, getting 5 and 10 cent records and just amassing a war chest. And, at night I'd listen to Casey Kasem and the Countdown and mark all the chart positions and everything. And, I came into this industry in a very strange way because I entered it truly as a colossal fan without really a definable skill. I was in bands in high school. I was known for writing really bad teenage poetry, very angsty teenage poetry, slam poetry, all this stuff. And, I was very verbal, but I didn't know what that would manifest into. And truthfully, as a student of songwriting, always, because I'm a nerd, I grew up, I wanted to emulate the Brill Building, right? I wanted to be Jeff Barry or Carol or, Ellie Greenwich or, Jerry Goffin or any of these people, Barry and Cynthia. I really wanted to, bring that to my generation. And I had no means of doing it. And when I started out, as you know, in the 80s, there were very few blueprints for songwriters, right? You had technical instructional books, but you didn't have anything that really got to the essence of what it is to actually sort of manifest a career. And so I started out with 15 years of missteps. And, I had my first hit at 35 years of age. And that's somewhat unheard of in the music business. I know Phil Galdston wrote Save the Best for Last at 42. But for a guy like me, I spent 15 years failing. I dropped out of NYU. I got a record deal very young. And at that time, I was a rapper. And as I always say, I was a pioneer rapper because I labeled myself alternative rap very early on because my music was so terrible. But I figured if I called it alternative, who hates on anything alternative? Alternative gospel, I'm going to listen to it. Alternative, bluegrass, edgier, I dig it. Anything alternative, I'm a fan of. So I went with that mantra. I got a record deal very young. My record came out at 21 on Select Records, which was a division of Atlantic, and I was dropped at 23. I was on the streets again, and
Oh,
I spent the next 12 years clawing my way through this industry, and you know, I rapped with a German accent next because I figured if I couldn't do it with an American accent, maybe I'd take on a sort of German sort of vocal hybrid, and was rapping over dance tracks, and had a song in a Whoopi Goldberg movie where she coaches the New York Knicks. You can hear me in my German accent. So
yeah.
I think that would be cultural appropriation or something, but I was a pioneer in it. Um,
I think you were searching to find
yeah,
yourself.
man, I did techno. I did everything, but truthfully, all I really wanted to do was craft song in a traditional sense. I'm a traditionalist writer, and I really wanted to just get in a room with artists and craft their narrative. Growing up in the 80s in the MTV generation, as you know, there were stars, and I believed in
Yeah.
stars. When you grow up in a time of Michael and Prince and Madonna
Oh,
and Morrissey and Michael Stipe and all these superstars at the front of the stage, I knew I wasn't one of them. So I was trying to use anything I could just to get behind the curtain because I had no ticket, I had no blueprint, and it took me 13 years of failures. And what separates me from, I think, the bulk of the writers in this industry, one of the defining traits is that the level of failure that for 13 straight years where there was just no light. And, I had glimmers, right? Carole King got wind of a project that I had done. She came down the studio, really dug my writing and collaborated with me and my partner at the time, a man named Dave Schomer, and we wrote and produced the last single she ever put out, title track of Love Makes the World, the album. And we were writing against Babyface and David Foster and all these incredible writers. And it was the first time that I had ever been identified as competent, and I was 29, and I thought that was life changing. And so that was great. I still couldn't get any room with any band or any singer songwriter because Kurt Cobain had come along and made the
uh,
notion of the co-writer inherently uncool with bands. So what I decided to do was create my own acts, and I created a slew of acts over a 2 or 3 year period, and we got 7 major label deals, which is also unheard of. And the first
yeah.
5 weren't even released. And that's an
Oh,
incredible, remember, pre-internet, pre-iTunes, it was a very different industry, right? And at that time, it was like pilots on a TV network. Certain pilots were just write-offs that never went to network. Those were always my records. So by the age of 34, it had completely dried up, and I spent that year doing drum programming on Kids Bop records. That was the highlight of that year. And not to take away anything because Kids Bop records are great and they're great for kids, but when you're just making the beats on a little SP12 drum machine, and you've blown every opportunity you've ever had to date, it's hard to reconcile. And I would pitch myself around town, but as a failed rapper, failed German rapper, failed dance music artist, failed techno artist, failed drum and bass artist, failed Kids Bop drum beat maker, it was very hard to get through. And finally, right when I was at the very, very bottom and it had ended, the phone was no longer being returned. I got a call from a man named Jonathan Daniel, and we had become very close. And he was a manager in the East Village, and we had all these cats in the East Village who were starting to make noise. There was J.J. Abrams was one of our really good friends, and then he became J.J. Abrams. He directs Star Wars, but back then he was just like our guy we sit and listen to music to. And Morgan Spurlock was this friend of ours who, one day I ran into in the street, and he had eaten cheeseburgers for 30 days straight. And I said, "Why are you eating McDonald's for 30 days straight?" He said, "I'm filming it for a documentary." So I wrote the Super
oh,
Size Me
wow.
song. So if you ever watch Super Size Me, the song
Yeah.
plays throughout the entire movie. I wrote that with Morgan. So I was getting moments, but I still was never, there was nothing, there was no through line. And Jonathan Daniel called me up. He said, "Look, I have a bunch of young bands that are beginning to happen. I have a scene, and they're independent little bands. They're run out of a kid who just graduated University of Florida named John Janik. He had a label called Fueled by Rum, and he's running out of a dorm room at Gainesville. And I'm gonna need an adult in the room who really knows how to craft song." First project he gave me was $28,000 all in. That included production, mastering, writing, mixing, and sample clearances if we use any samples. So I already knew that if I didn't call Kids Bop for more work, it was going to be a really gruesome year. And I made this record. I put everything I'd ever done into this record. and I made it with a man named Dave Katz who would really shape my future. We did tons of records together, and we had a number one hit. So of course, it's the record right when I
Wow.
was at the very, very bottom that changed it all. And the funny thing about it was, up to that point, I had failed a million times, but I wasn't repeating mistakes. I was finding new ways to fail, but I wasn't repeating mistakes. And so
Yeah.
at that point, I became a craftsman in the way I'd always hoped, in which I studied and studied and studied and studied. And I picked up all these writing tricks through the years, and I began all these writing exercises. And, I began to take this as serious as anything I'd ever done in my life. I knew that the deck was stacked against me because the writers who were I was competing against for slots on records, the bulk of them had been artists who had had one or two hits at the front of a stage. And that's a lot
Mhm.
sexier, as you know, to an artist, like somebody who's really been there. Hey, that
Right.
person wrote, I grew up with that guy on MTV and now he's writing my songs. And I was this guy who nobody could even figure out. I was an anomaly. Like, who is this guy? Nothing has worked for him, blah, blah, blah. So what I did was I went back to creating bands again because now I began to understand how to write a song. So created a band called Boys Like Girls in
Mm.
Massachusetts, and we had a smash with a song called Great Escape. We the Kings, Bradenton, Florida, smash called Check Yes Juliet. Worked in Metro Station, did Shake It. These are all big, big hits. And finally, I learned how to do it. It took me 35 years to write a good song. And then
Wow.
I really locked it in. And the funny thing is, as time grew, as hits began to mount and my currency began to mean something, at least in this business, I went back to my initial formula, which began with Carole King and collaborating with Nile Rodgers and people like that in the front end of my career, which was every song and every project that I took on with a young artist, some kid with a funny haircut, I was gonna balance it writing with one of my idols, And I made this commitment to myself 15 years ago that once now that I've actually permeated this, I'm gonna take every single opportunity to learn from the greats and then learn from the kids and be a generational conduit between the 2, because there's so
Wow.
many tricks to pick up between both. And that's what I've done. So for every Panic at the Disco, I do Ringo Starr. For every, Walk the Moon, I do Billy Idol. It doesn't matter. And so um, I've been able to live out my dream, which is just the most magical thing. But Clay, I got to tell you, man, it's so competitive out there that, and I love this so much that I take steps that keep me in it that I think are really sort of at the kernel of sort of the little nugget that fuels the whole thing. What do I do? Between any set before any session, I do 3 days out. I begin like copious amounts of homework, man. I go under the hood of the
Mm.
artist and I stalk them basically. I'm like this creepy stalker. But I'm going through every YouTube interview, every print interview. I'm trying to find little interstitial bits of wisdom, I'm trying to find little pickup notes, you know, humor. Are they funny? Are they dry? Are they, where are
Mhm.
they headed in their life? What personal life? Where are they at? Single, married, happy, sad? Um, just
Yeah,
historic.
you're saying exactly the kinds of things that we teach our Songtown members about. Do your homework before you show up to
Well,
write.
Clay, let me
I
tell
mean,
you, man,
it's
I get in
it
a room with somebody, and it's imperative to me that I know infinitely more about them than they ever know about me. If I've done
yeah,
that in a collaborative setting, I think I've set myself up to win because I've respected the art of song and I've respected the artist. And since primarily the bulk of my career has been spent collaborating with the artists themselves, I want them to know that, you know, I I'm a screenwriter and I'm trying to write the sequel to whatever they've done at any level.
right.
And I'm trying to respect their craft and their art, and I'm trying to um, help their narrative and their journey and push it along. And I'm not trying to be the star, the face of it. I'm a background cat. I'm a below the line guy in my own head always. But the notion is,
Mhm.
I want to craft that movie that keeps it going, and that's what gets me up in the morning. So yes, it's putting that work in, and it's writing exercises, man. I learned this from a professional athlete many years ago, who had been going through a hard time. in the NBA and shifted his regiment where he never took a day off for the rest of his career during the season. And what he did was he had a
Wow.
bunch different disciplines: yoga, Pilates, meditation, swimming, stretching, blah, blah, blah. And once he applied that to his craft, he just had a Hall of Fame career. You know, there's a guy named Steve Nash. And I decided to try
Yeah.
the same, take the same approach to my songwriting. So, because after you have some success, and I know you know this, you know, after you have some success, complacency is somewhat inevitable because you begin to rely on tricks because you have
Right.
certain tricks that got you across the line, and you think, okay, those are going to go on forever. I can just keep, you know, you pulling from this little bag in your tools. But the problem is, your tools have to expand rapidly. So, I took the same
Yeah.
approach where I started doing all these little writing exercises I created for myself, and I do them every day of the week. You know, one day it's going to be writing titles, 5 titles. Then I cross reference them with Spotify and make sure there's a unique quality to them. If it's a title that I've heard more than 5 times, it gets thrown out. If it's a title that was an iconic song, I throw it out for the most part. Um,
Hmm.
and the notion of that is I'm just trying to exercise the muscle. It's like playing Wordle every day, you know? I another day is just melody day. I pull out an acoustic and just try to come up with a melody. First instinctive melody out of my head and then craft it a little bit and leave it as a voice note, record it. Third day is chorus day because I love popping the octave in my choruses and I have like certain tricks. So I just try to find that sweet spot and go for it. Fourth day, I write narrative poetry, you know? And I got to tell you something, I didn't even know what narrative poetry was. I just liked the way the word sounded, but truthfully, I love the idea of, slam poetry and I love stories. And so I began writing a story just about, I'm a New York guy and writing about the history of New York over the last 100 years and just sort of using old family folklore that I'd heard and trying to turn these into poems and sort of lengthy tales about the city that,
Wow.
is no longer there. I've written about 200 pages of this. It might not ever see the light of day, but and hopefully it won't for everybody's eyes. But for me, it's this incredible writing exercise, man, because I'm constantly um I'm exercising the muscles. So when I step into a session, I'm quick. And I need that because writers are great. I'm blessed to work with incredible talents. So I have to be able to hold my own every day of the week. And that's like a professional athlete. So it's akin to it.
Yeah. And people don't, a lot of people have the misconception that, oh, once you write a hit, you know what you're doing and you keep doing it. But it's really is a day. If you want to stay current, if you want to keep staying inspired to write, you have to keep you have to keep working it just as hard as you did when you started. It's a lifetime kind of trade that you're working
It's
at.
like, it's a misnomer that, you enter this business and you believe that things progress at a logical, slow pace, but they don't. Music moves at the speed of light, and trends
Oh yeah.
change in a second. And, right now, a lot of it's sonics, but it's also in the way songs are written. Right now, I think more songs are
Hmm.
fragments that are strewn together and Frankenstein together in different ways that didn't exist before. And even though I'm a traditionalist and I really can sit down and write my own song and feel pretty confident in my output, I am a collaborator, and a collaboration has been king for me. Collaboration has really given me a career to be able to do this. So I want to stay up on why things are working, why songs connect. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I'm going to pander in any way, shape, or form. But if I understand, if I learn something, I can unlearn it. But at least I have the knowledge of why music is evolving and how and all that.
Yeah. I think a lot of songwriters, they they're willing to study the craft. Well, they don't want to study co-writing. And co-writing, I know that is probably the biggest skill or, just collaboration in general, whether you're writing or producing or whatever you're doing. It's probably the most important skill in the music business. Would
Well,
you agree with
I
that?
mean, to me, when you're like 4 or 5, you go to preschool, right? And they set you up and they're trying to see how you can collaborate with other kids, right? They put you in this little
Yeah.
pen and they're watching you. Man, your whole life is collaboration. It gets to a point where it becomes speed dating. Songwriting is speed dating, right? Co-writing is
Yeah.
speed dating. And you have a very limited window to make an impression on somebody, to feel each other out, feel the energy, and then create art together. That's not an easy ask. So, um, to develop the skills, there's so many subtleties that you have to be able to read. You're a therapist on some days. Other days, you're going to
Yeah.
carry the entire load on your back creatively because somebody else might not have it. Other days, you're somewhat of a passive participant. I wrote a song called "Marry Me" with Train, and Pat Monahan completely carried the song. He's an incredible lyricist. I got a free ride as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned. It really wasn't indigenous to my writing, but he carried us. Different situations call for different things. And collaboration to me in the music business is king because at the end of the day, once the song is finished, everything is a collaboration between management, artist, label, blah blah blah. It's like this is not turf wars. Like we all are one united front to get a song actually heard, which is it's climbing a mountain. So you need to understand how to work with others, how to read a room. There's a lot of skill sets, which I discuss in my book. 21 Hit Wonder,
Yeah.
flopping my way to the top of the charts. Matt Holt, Ben Bella Books in stores now. There it is. Look at that
There it
guy. I've
is.
never looked better than
It's
on that
beautiful.
cover. That's my best features. By the way, I'm not normally, can I just say something? I am not this
Yeah.
pasty and I'm not this puffy. My phone, this computer and the lighting is doing very weird things to me. But I just want to tell you, I'm actually a very sexy man. You're just
Oh,
not seeing it. I
I can
promise.
tell.
I
No, I
promise.
mean, you can't hide it.
Yeah.
I mean, the lighting's not perfect, but you can't
Well,
hide it,
Clay,
Sam.
I have to tell you something. You have like you have that like Martha Stewart lighting. You just look like a glorious man. I don't know. I'm looking at myself and I feel like, all right, man, this guy needs some vitamins. But I promise you, it doesn't look like this in the mirror. So it's fine. Can I say one final thing about the book before I go? One final thing about the book.
Yeah.
Um, s- Songwriters. One thing I'd say. This is the only book you ever need to read. But now let me tell you why. Because I wrote it over 7 years, and it is dripping in warts and exposed cuts and failures. And it is a book if you are looking for something that isn't glossy, where you really discuss what it is like to actually do this for a living, to get in a room with a different person every day that we can try to create art. I delve into it, and I think there's something to that. You can go to buy Spare at the bookstore. You can do Prince Harry if that's your thing. But I'm telling you, I prefer my book. I wrote it myself. There's no ghostwriters, there's no co-writers, there's no veneers, and it
Nice.
is really me against the world. And most importantly, every penny of the book from my end goes to a charity called Musicians on Call. I didn't take an advance for it, and I am on a book tour right now. Come and see me. I've done 35 dates so far. And I'm traversing the US on my own dime, speaking at colleges and universities. I've hit 32 universities, and I guess because we've done like 5 ticketed events, and every bit of it goes to charity. And I'm just trying to hit people to Musicians on Call, this incredible organization that brings music bedside to patients at hospitals. I'm very involved in, and I'm hoping to like sort of enlighten the youth and just say, look at this face, look at this doughy face with these strange features. If this guy could actually do this for a living, so can you. You're going to face 10,000 rejections, 10,000 no's as a writer. Every day is a rejection, and you will power through it when you read my book. My work is done.
Oh man, that's beautiful. And my copy just came a couple days ago, and I've read the first 4 chapters. And let me tell you, I can't wait to read the rest of it. It's a really good
Thanks,
read,
brother.
and I can just tell. I'm glad to hear that you wrote it yourself, and I could tell like it has a voice, a unique voice to it, and I'm glad to hear that because I was wondering. I was like, this really sounds like this must be Sam. I mean,
It's just
it's really well written.
Thanks, man. I mean, I did have 7 years, so if I didn't nail it, I'm not much of a writer. But, well, I've read so all I do are read, entertainment bios, right? I read, any music book, I devour it, and, if there's a film book, I devour it, TV books, I devour it. I'm just obsessed with this stuff because it's all I have. I'm just sort of a dork who likes, pop cultural stuff throughout the decades. And I would say the bulk of them, there's like a hand nudging it, which is fine. It's just a different thing, but sometimes
Yeah.
it sort of takes a voice that's specific and neuters it. And I think it's imperative sometimes to really hear it, like, unfiltered, man. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of an unfiltered cat, and, for better or worse, but, I'm real, and I do keep it real, and I can go to bed at night saying, "Alright, this is me, this is who I am, this is why I do this every day." So, I don't know, man, but look, thank you, man. I love, like, songwriters, you're my tribe. I'm honored to do this, you're honored to do it. It's the greatest life in the world, and, if I ever get to meet you, give me a pound or a hug, and God bless you.
All right.
Thanks, dude.
Peace out, y'all.
Alright,
Yeah.
later.